end. But I'm really excited to turn it over to my good friend, Greg, who is the program person at Will County Audubon. And I believe Greg will introduce our featured speaker. Greg, they are all yours.
Well, our timing is pretty good. We got finished a minute ago, and we're now online with you all. And I can't tell you how excited I am about this program that is being given to us by Dr. Clark. And we are going to be listening to her program about crow behavior. She's done years and years and years of research on this, and I'm really pleased to introduce Ann Clark for this program.
Thank you so much to Will County Audubon, Greg, Matt in Illinois Audubon for inviting me. I have a crow button, and if you happen on me on the street and push it, I'm likely to just keep talking. So we'll see what happens here. And I often have too many slides. I'm prepared to skip ahead should we go over, but I also have ways to answer questions with things that, so feel free to put any sort of question in there and we'll see what we can do. Whoops, let's see if I can get us moving. Come on. Well, it would help if I can move the slide. Come on. Here we go. Okay. So first of all, I would like to stand back a little bit and begin with exactly who are the crows and why study them. I know you guys are all bird people, so I don't really have to talk to you about who a crow is in some ways, but I think there's an underappreciation of crow diversity. And then after talking a little bit more about why anybody would study a rather monomorphic big black bird that wherever they go, wherever they are in the world, everybody knows what a crow is and they all look similar. We're going to talk about American crows, in particular, the ones I've studied, and their family life, particularly in an slightly urban setting. From there, I want to talk a little bit about what it is that city crows might have done in order to move into a city, how they treat crow researchers and other people, and about boldness. And then also ask about whether cities are healthy for crows. Finally, and I'm hoping I can talk a little bit about this, to make a plug for actually conserving crows. So first of all, there's a lot of crows. There's at least 46 or more different species of corvus, that is the crows and the ravens, and I'm going to hand wave and call them all crows. They're basically black, although some have a little bit of white or gray on them. And many of them are found just on one single island, while others, like the raven and the orange circled one is our American crow, are widespread in one way or another. Of those 46 species, about 50% actually live fairly close with humans in their cities. So what makes a crow different from another crow if I've got 46 species? Well, I want you guys to look at these bills, and what you'll see immediately is there's some variation in those bills. And here's a really spectacular one on Crassirostris. And these were all just drawn years and years ago before we knew anything about which species was really which species. But when you think about crows, you have to think about how can they vary ecologically. And of course, bills are one of the ways that birds do it. The other big way that crows may be doing things is in how they use their feet. But I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but I'm just throw it out there. So first of all, backtracking from all of those 46 species, there's been a lot of heightened public interest in crows over the last, say, couple decades, as word of their cognitive abilities have come out. And they're now known in many circles as feathered apes, where they've been featured because of their abilities to learn, to problem solve, to count, to negotiate reciprocal exchanges, and Also, because from the point of view of someone who's actually studied them, they have really complicated social relationships among themselves. So one of the things that people will immediately say if you say crow to them these days is, oh, they use tools, feathered ape. Well, of course, not all crows use tools, but the one that they're really talking about is the New Caledonian crow, Corvus moneguloides. It lives only on the island of New Caledonia and one or two smaller islands that are right next to it. They eat grubs, and the grubs are really, really big. You can see some in that stamp there. And it's estimated that 6 grubs will make the protein content for a crow in a day. There are on the island no woodpeckers. So the crows apparently have elaborated their food resources on the island by being able to go after something that woodpeckers would normally take. They're embedded in the trees, and in order to get these grubs out, they make tools, either the pandanus tools, which you see on the stamp, which they snip from pandanus leaves, or these hook tools, stick them down, and the grubs grab onto them, and then the crow pulls them out. So not only do they make these tools, from a New Caledonian crow's point of view, any problem, if you need a problem solved, you just go and get a stick first, and then you figure out how it's going to help you. They are the ones that Greg was referring to about dropping stones into water. And let's see, wait a minute here. So one of the interesting things about the New Caledonian crow is that not only do they cognitively get it as to how to make and use tools, but they have actually specialized a whole lot more. They have been living on that island for so long that not only has their brain specialized to do it, but so has their bill. And here's a bill of a New Caledonian crow at the top compared to one of our American crows at the bottom. And what you see is a pincher-like, almost hardware-like bill, and the eyes are actually rotated a little bit forward. So this is a bird that not only is cognitively specialized, but morphologically specialized to do what it's doing. And looking at the New Caledonian crows and their abilities to use tools, studies of lots of different crows have taken off, and you have everything from using cars as tools to crack nuts, studies of jackdaws, recognizing humans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that crows have done, and about 50% of the species, is that they have adapted to living around or with people in some measure. And so our work has been focused on the American crow and has allowed us to ask things like, what traits allow the American crow or other crows to adapt to this increasingly urban world? In an urbanizing world, birds actually have become key players in understanding how animals adapt or not to living in our cities. And there are famous studies of song adjustment in the tits, or the ways that pigeons use our parks and people to get food or nest under bridges. And we would say, let's put crows on that list. So the first thing is you can stand back and say, okay, well, what traits in general help a bird adapt to an urban lifestyle? And people thinking about urban animals have usefully dichotomized it or trichotomized it as those who avoid it, those who just don't ever show up. Those who exploit it, which would be like the pigeons or the house sparrows, who've really become almost limited to living in and around people. And those who've adapted, those who've made changes and can be found perhaps both in cities and not in cities, but in some way have been able to move in. Ecologically, these generally have broad diets. They have nest sites that they can find in the city. Behaviorally, they tend to be flexible and innovative and very exploratory. Um, and often it takes some time. So there needs to be some sort of sources of variation in the birds and enough time that they can take advantage of the ability to change both behaviorally, quickly, culturally, and evolutionarily. American crows are so widespread, as most of you appreciate, they're widespread across much of North America, not in deserts, but otherwise. And the just the fact that they're so widespread would give you some idea that they're very broadly adaptable. The other aspect of American crow biology going way, way back is they almost certainly have been living with people wherever those people have lived on the North American continent, including our indigenous peoples, our Native Americans, and probably using their garbage dumps just like ours. But in moving into our cities, they obviously have made some very innovative adaptations. They've shown themselves to be extremely behaviorally flexible. They can learn our garbage routes. They can learn our garbage days. They can dumpster dive with the best of them. Moreover, urban living seems to have benefited their populations. Now, interestingly, with respect to when they moved into urban areas, even if they've been synanthropic for a long time, it's actually only since the 60s that American crows have been recorded actually reproducing, living in the cities. But you can see what's happened since then as their populations have gone way up across the years from the mid 60s to the early 2000s. That sharp drop off that you see around 2001 represents West Nile virus. This is not in line with, this is an out of place slide, but I will mention right now that there's also the fish crow, which is actually sympatric with our American crows across much of the Northeast and down into the Southeast. They started probably in the Gulf area and Florida. And they also have been specialized, or I should say, adapted to living in cities. This is Connor Loomis, is my former graduate student. He's now got his degree. And we've hypothesized that they've been moving north as they have been now all the way up into Canada, moving north Walmart to Walmart. But my colleague Kevin McGowan documented just very locally this increase with American crows as they've moved into urban areas just by looking at his hometown in Springfield, going back every year for Christmas. And you can see again across the counting crows from the early mid 70s to the 90s, how much the crow populations have increased. Why did American crows move into urban areas? Well, there's reasonable hypotheses that make good sense. First of all, our human resources, our garbage dumps, our landfills close to cities, our compost heaps, and then just what happens around the dumpsters of a grocery store offers much more stable human sourced food year round. So a crow in the Northeast, at least in my latitude, has an option of migrating, but in the winter, we obviously offer food that would otherwise not be available and might be covered with snow, and perhaps alleviating the need to migrate. One of the big reasons is probably that there's no hunting in the city. And one of the reasons that crow populations may have taken off in urban areas is that right around 1972, when they were included in the Migratory Bird Act, and furthermore, cities don't allow hunting, is that that suddenly became safe to be around people as opposed to very, very risky. And when they moved in, at least, although I will argue that this is changing, there were certainly fewer predators of some particular kinds. Great horned owls, red-tailed hawks are major predators on crows. And these, at least during the time that they moved in, were slower to be present. And so they were in much smaller numbers at the time. I think this has changed, and it's actually something that's worth thinking about. So I've been working with the Ithaca, what we call the Ithaca Crow Project. And as a group, it's now studied crows over about 50% of the time that crows have lived in cities. Kevin McGowan, who some of you almost certainly know his name, if not him, he established the mark population in Ithaca in about 1989. And I joined in around 2000, 2001, and we've followed then the crows together with my students until we actually stopped in 2022. And that's just a picture of some of our multitudinous students and Crow Group collaborators, without whom this would not be possible. So you can say, well, why in the world aren't lots of people studying crows? I mean, they're obvious, they're wonderful, they're great fun to watch. And what we're doing is trying to ban them. However, in order to study them and trap them and ban them, there's a problem, because crows, despite the fact that we just said, oh, bold animals move into cities, crows are anything but bold, and they're very, very astute about noticing any change in their environment. So these crows, that's a big net that will shoot out from the right, and these crows have been habituated to that net with the food in front of it for about 2 weeks, and I moved something in order to get it set up to actually shoot it off. And there was no crows that day. So we've taken another tack. We, rather than trying to just shoot nets over crows or trying to capture the live flying ones, we've been banding every year through all those years since 1989 in the nests. And that means we have to find the nests. We find females on the nests, often because she'll give a whining sound as she begins incubation, or just because we've followed the whole building of the nest. And then we have to climb to the nest. In the nest, we find the kind of crow that can't fly away. And the ones down on the lower left are about the age in which we typically try to weigh, measure, band, etc. However, urban areas often have tall trees, particularly where we're working in the Northeast. And so each operation, it takes ladders, climbing equipment. We do it with harnesses and ropes in order to reach these extremely high nests, some of which are on the order of 30 some meters high. With all that effort, you can imagine that when we bring them down, this might be the only time we have that baby in hand. And we weigh, we measure, we take blood samples, we put on wing tags, we put on bands, color bands, and then we put them back into the nest until fledging and wish them well. And as I say, that's probably the only time we'll ever have it in hand, unless it conveniently dies at some point and we actually get its body back. And we do this because this study depends on being able to recognize individual crows. We're trying to follow individual crow life histories from the time that they're an egg in a nest to whenever we can determine that they may have died or disappeared. And so with the unique color banding and a unique tag that for each crow, we can recognize them both close up and from a distance. And we have discovered the crows can recognize us, which has mostly been to our benefit, because they know us in our cars, they know our faces, they know our our individual cars. And we've been able to actually do experiments then at the side of the road between their knowing us as individuals and knowing us as peanut feeders. So let me talk to you a little bit more about crow natural history as represented in the Ithaca population. First of all, and very interestingly, they are cooperative breeders. The fish crows that I showed you, who are moving up from the southeast and are found in the increasingly to the north, those guys have a completely different social system. They're group livers. They establish territories just long enough to raise their kids as pairs, and then they go back to living in flocks. American crows have territories, and they're cooperatively breeding. They can breed as pairs. They don't all breed with extended families, but the youngsters in a cooperative breeding system, the youngsters of the last year tend to stay the next year and often assist in raising the young of the new year. And sometimes they stay for multiple years. So you get, if you look down at the picture down in the right, lower part, you'll see multiple tag colors. Each one of those tag colors represents a different year class in that family. And our families have gotten up to 15 birds. There's one pair, there's always one pair, and then their extended sets of kids in the family. Urban and rural, I'm going to try to draw a few contrasts between urban and rural living. So we've got rural crows that are right around Ithaca. So we can actually make these comparisons and have done quite a lot with that. One of the first things you can notice if you're watching crows in both areas is that urban territories are much smaller and more densely packed. So they're about 5 times the density that you would find of crow families in a rural area. Furthermore, the family sizes are actually larger in urban areas. So they have smaller territories living with a larger family on a smaller space. And you can, of course, analogize that perhaps with urban humans. Cooperative breeding is uncommon across all taxa. It's probably commonest in invertebrates among birds. It's also seen in fish and in mongoose species, but they have common features across those taxa. And it is particularly common in corvids. So you have the scrub jays up in the right are cooperative breeders. The kookaburra is a cooperative breeder. The mongoose and the meerkats are cooperative breeders. These tend to be all slow to mature, with offspring that remain in the family, sometimes well after maturity, and helpers. These ones that remain then act as helpers in baby rearing and other tasks. Like other cooperative breeders, our crows have, because we've been able to follow some of them throughout their entire lives, we have documented 4 crows that have actually reached the age of 19. And the one that was 3 males, all of those males had, by the way, lost their territories at that point. They had been driven off their territories by a younger male. The female, MP Jessup there, was in her 19th year and she was breeding. And I don't know what happened to her. It was a renest. You can ask me about Merlins later. What do the young crows do? They help their families in lots of different ways. We documented not only do they feed at the nest, but they act as sentinels. They act as nest sentinels and watch the nest. They may bring food to the female on the nest. They act to defend territories. And we've been particularly interested in whether or not they act as social tutors, although I have no conclusive final word on that. Our one big study got wrecked by West Nile virus. But we have looked at aspects of behavior in the family that suggest that being a cooperative breeder might be particularly good for the family as a whole to discover new sources of food. One of my graduate students, Jen Campbell Smith, looked at juvenile crow and versus other members of the family in their just in their natural foraging behavior. And what we found was that the juvenile crows, since they don't know anything, are picking up non-food items far more often. But what this graph doesn't show, and let me just say on the graph, adults never pick up things that aren't food. They know what food is. They don't waste their time. Yearlings and two-year-olds, three-year-olds that aren't breeding may sometimes, very occasionally, manipulate non-food. But the juveniles were kind of ADHD. They pick up food and then they put it down in seconds. And they may drop it, pick up, drop all sorts of things, and never really do anything with it. The yearlings, like the one watching the juvenile in this picture, sometimes then walk over, and if they start investigating what this item is, perhaps opening something that appeared to be non-food at the time, they spend time. So you have a sort of tiered system of random discovery and individuals who have not given up their curiosity, who might actually discover something really useful. The crow sociality in these families, they tend to watch out for each other in many ways. They alloprene. This is an adult trying to preen a kid who doesn't look like he loves it. They act as sentinels for each other. And as represented by the two upper right photographs, we have actually documented very occasionally, in this case, an adult male who had a female on the nest, and one of his family members is this sick bird with bad eyes. He stopped, he brought food in toward the nest, saw her, stopped and fed her, an adult. She's 2 or 3 years old, might be his daughter, and then he went back and gathered more food for the nest. They live permanently on territories, but remember, and many people appreciate this since they see them in big flocks, even with these territories, they often go off even daily to forage, and much of the year they may be roosting in small groups off territory. During the winter, if they migrate, they roost in huge groups, as many people appreciate and some people do not like. Off territory, they're not always so caring. When I watch a family group, you almost never see aggression. We'll come to that. But off territory, you get these rumbles in which there's 2 or 3 crows down on the ground and brings all sorts of other crows in to watch. Whether those fights are serious, we don't know. I suspect they're mostly young birds, but we've never seen a bird killed or injured out in one of these, but I will not say that doesn't happen. So let's ask, how did they become a breeder in this complex social structure? Well, before West Nile, and things did change with West Nile because there were many younger birds breeding. The pre-West Nile age at first breeding for both males and females is well over the age of maturity. So they're both mature at about the age of 2, i.e. capable of reproducing. But for females, the average age is somewhere between 3 and 4, and for males, somewhere on the order of 4 to 5. And the males and females also differ in how it is that they become breeders. So I'll just give you a little bit on this graphic. For males, you can either, in many cases, inherit the territory. If you stay with your dad or an older brother, you may actually inherit the territory when they die or leave. You can also, as shown by the very light blue, you can establish a new territory with a mate, probably by doing a little bit of fighting your way into a slot. They also very frequently bud, and that's in black. And what that means is that they establish a territory that is contiguous with and slightly overlapping with their parents, who actually may help them a bit in carving that out. What you don't, and sometimes males also replace males that have died. For females, it is mostly replacement. Females die on the nest at much younger ages and in ways that males don't, because males do not incubate. So great horned owls or red tails come in, and we find females killed on the nest, which means that there are many more widowers than there are widows. And it is a replacement that is the most common thing for females. People didn't think they ever budded and got a contiguous territory. But after West Nile virus, with so many birds having died, we lost 30 to 40% of our banded birds and our family members, known family members. At that point, a number of females did find a mate right next door and budded from their family territory. I've stressed cooperation, but there's also competition. And although you may not see it on an everyday basis, they food share, they preen each other, etc. But one of the ways we find out there has been competition is competition for reproduction. And sometimes, in this case, it's required us to look at paternity genetically in order to see it. And what we discovered was perhaps rather surprising. So if you look over to the right, you have the pair. In some cases, a female has died, and so the pair now consists of a male and a new female, and his son is in the group. And so it's a young male who's in the group and mature, trying to mate with his stepmom. And that accounted for about 6.5% of our offspring produced during the years that we looked at this. About 10% of the babies that are not fathered by the male in the territory were fathered by some other male that was completely outside the group. And then 3.5%, we hate to say it, were fathered by the son of the female. So the father and his son were competing for reproduction with the mother of the son. And so we have about 3.5% were actually incestuous matings. Well, this raises the specter of inbreeding. And you can just in general ask, is urban life riskier in some sense than is rural life? And we do have evidence of a variety of diseases that seem more prevalent in urban areas. West Nile may be among them, because we may do things to harbor the mosquitoes that transmit it. But nevertheless, with that inbreeding, we can ask, does inbreeding result in a higher risk of disease and mortality in the crows in Ithaca? And what you see in this graph is on the bottom, birds that were either alive, died of disease, died of trauma, or died but of unknown reasons. And on the y-axis is a measure of how inbred they are. So the higher that measure, the more inbred they are. And what you can see is that birds who died of disease were apparently, on average, more inbred than the birds who died in other ways. Now, these are philopatric, meaning that they're tend to stay home and stay with their families. And so one of the other questions that we're trying to work on is how much actual overt aggression is actually there. The trouble with aggression is that it happens quickly and it can get over with quickly. So we're trying to map out the fights that we have seen. And indeed, we've seen some fairly spectacular ones. And where does that happen? Well, it happens exactly as you would have predicted from the genetics. It happens between males who have either a younger brother or a son who is also a mature male in the group. And here's one case in point. XX was 11 at the time. He had unsuccessful, he'd been with his family most of the time of his first 10 years. He'd left a couple times during breeding seasons and things got tense with his dad, but he finally took off and established a new territory by himself at the age of 10, with a mate and with a younger brother in tow, and 8R. And I was called out one day because sure enough, 8R and XX are fighting over this female. And they were wrestling and fighting. I have video of this. And they kept on trying to pin each other with their legs until all of a sudden the neighbors called, the neighbor crows. And they jumped right up and took off together collaboratively after the neighbor crows. The end result of that whole altercation, and apparently several more, however, is that the older male, XX, lost his territory and his mate to his younger brother, 8R. And I will just mention, because I'm not going to tell you about them in the interest of time, because I've got too much to go through, is that there were 2 murders, and you can ask me later about those. So real quickly, have city crows changed their behavior? Well, first of all, yes, we have evidence that they have changed their mobbing behavior. They mob predators as families or neighborhoods. And when you go up to their nests, we are nest predators. Some time ago, 38 years ago, another group of researchers documented that, in fact, already rural and urban crows were responding differently to human intruders at their nests, where rural crows may have called, but then they stayed away, sorry about that, a gun range away. In urban areas, they came much closer and dove at intruders. And the key explanation seems to be, of course, that there's no hunters in town. So urban crows seem to know they're not going to be shot at. We'd taken data from 1990 onwards on the number of mobbers at urban and rural nests. And so we could go back and look and see whether we had the same result. Sure enough, urban groups had much greater numbers and more close mobbing by more crows in our comparison also. But we also noted something very strange, because I was trying to look at this across time just to make sure that everything was similar across time. And we noticed that after 2007, we got an incredible drop in the number of mobbers at a nest. This is an average. And what it turned out was that after 2008, we had many nests where we climbed to the nest and we got no mobbers. We would have, the crows were there, but they would be just giving a few desultory caws from a neighboring yard. This was still a minority, but in general, the number of mobbers that they brought in, as well as these zeros, meant that there was an average, a much lower number of mobbers in the last years. So we ask why. We don't know, but our surmises are probably just like yours. First of all, they've gotten to know us, and now we feed them peanuts, so now they don't mind? Well, MP, she's the 19-year-old, she loved peanuts. She followed me around to get peanuts, but man, we followed her for 14 years, and every time we went to her nest, she mobbed like crazy. She'd fly off and she'd come back with other birds. in tow to mob us. So one possibility is my students were doing a lot of work with peanuts. So there were, however, not MP, but younger birds and younger families were growing up with us as peanut tossers. They were getting our peanuts. And so by the time they actually were 2 or 3 or 4 years old, they never had realized that we would climb to their nests. And perhaps that level of confusion was damped their responses. Another possibility that I like as well, laid on top of that, is that it's possible that when you mob, and I've seen this in many birds, when you get birds mobbing at a nest because there's a predator, other predators hear it. And now we've got increasing numbers of red tails. And so this is just a graph down at the bottom showing you that over the same time, red tails have been increasing in cities as well. So one of the possibilities is that the birds have, against a backdrop of more red tails in town around their territories, they themselves have depressed mobbing and said, red tails are worse than people. People leave, red tails don't. So one question that many people have asked is, are urban birds just plain bolder? Have they just become bolder? Have they been selected to be bolder? Only the boldest moved in. So many people have tested this, usually with a novel object, and they'll put novel objects out by the food, like a rubber ducky. And this has been replicated that it seems like urban birds of many species seem bolder and more willing to eat near a novel object than their rural counterparts. My former grad student, Dave Colucci, tested this with a slightly different idea, saying, well, it's only novel if you haven't seen it before, and suggesting that when we test them with these crazy ducks and bright colored plastic, we're basically slanting the results, because the novel object is by its very nature more familiar to urban birds who've seen lots more bright colored plastic. So what he did is took 4 objects and ordered them by familiarity, as we hypothesized, in the 2 environments. So in the urban environment, well, rocks are probably similar, but in an urban environment, seeing a whole corn cob is probably much less familiar than it is in a rural environment. And so the box order of the box and the corn cob are reversed. And then a truly novel object was a tall, shiny lamp base. And sure enough, when we look at how scary the object was, we can show you how the crows ranked their willingness to actually approach food near that novel object. And what we found is that in the 2 environments, they reversed their objection to going to the corn cob versus the box. And if you look at the rural birds, were less scared of the corn cob than were the urban birds, and vice versa with the box. Everybody was scared of the lamppost. Yeah. So the last thing, and I'm pushing time, so Greg, you'll have to come in here and cut me off, but I wanted to just say a little bit about something that people talk about a lot, like, are we hurting these birds? Are we offering them things, particularly dietarily, that such that city living is really unhealthy for birds? And I think the quick answer is yes, to some extent. So we did a study with urban and rural nestlings in which we looked at growth, and we looked at health measures, how much protein in their blood, how much calcium in their blood. And what we found was that compared to rural crows, suburban crows had fewer nestlings per brood. That should have made them bigger, but the nestlings were smaller, in fact, and they had less calcium in their serum and less protein in their serum. So it seems like they are getting less good food in an urban area. And one of the possibilities is something that I think is a really useful idea, an ecological trap. We can even say that, apply that to humans in some cases. And in this case, this is a golf course, but we're making our landscape look natural, big trees, lawns, golf course lawns. But we roll those golf courses. They're hard to get insects out of. Those big trees force the crows into kind of very small territories. The tree types may not be natural. So what we're offering is a landscape that fallaciously looks like a great place to find food. And then once the adults are down there, they can find the easy food like the dumpster stuff, but that's not good for nestlings. So here's a smattering of what some of our crows find. Needless to say, not the best thing to take to the nestlings. Here's a picture of a natural food, a masting beech tree. And I suspect that it's a whole lot less fun and easy to harvest a whole lot of beech nuts than it is to end up getting a large piece of pizza. So the last little point that I want to make here is to return to crow diversity. And Greg, can you just tell me if I go on for 3 or 4 more minutes, is that way too much? Greg? All right.
I think you're fine. This is Fox. Go for it. 3 minutes.
Head for it? Okay.
Yeah, we're good here, so keep
Okay.
going.
All right. So just to return to crow diversity and raise something that I really would hope that you guys would be interested in, probably more than almost anybody else I would talk to because you're into birds. And that is the question of, should we be worrying about the conservation of Corvus species of crows? I mean, how in the world nobody looks at American crow flocks and says, oh my God, we've got to worry. Well, look at this. This is from eBird data trends. And what we see is everywhere you see on the American crow map that's red, the darker red it is, the more they're decreasing in populations. The raven, on the other hand, has a sort of mottled appearance. In many cases, it is actually increasing and spreading. So should we worry about the American crow? Well, I would. And we have no explanation for this. To extend this, I think one of the things that I, as a student of social behavior and ecology of crows in our country, is that if you think about the group, crows and ravens, they're really a gold mine of comparisons. Yeah, they're all black or black and gray, but nevertheless, because they're so similar in some ways, they're so interesting in terms of trying to understand what makes a different social structure. They have all sorts of different social structures: territorial pairs, breeding pairs and flocks, territorial cooperative breeders. What about all this learning ability? Do they have cultures? Brain size, is that something we can relate within crows to who's a tool user? And why do some adapt to humans and some don't? In a study my grad student and I did some years back, we looked at how much information we've actually got on all of those species. And at the time, 36% of them had no studies of any behavior in the field. And that includes the Hawaiian crow, which is now extinct in the wild, although being introduced. And what you can see is only 24% had like greater than 10 studies. And I can tell you it takes a lot more than 10 studies to figure out an American crow. So here's just a couple of the things that we might be missing. Among other things, Hawaiian crows recently in captivity, the groups that are been raised there in captivity, have been tested with tools and an opportunity to use tools. And it appears that they naturally and quite quickly adapt to using tools, and their bills are actually not dissimilar from the New Caledonian crows. So we may have had a tool user out there that has, for all intents and purposes, gone extinct. Hopefully we can get them back, but Hawaii has lost a lot of its ecological circumstances. On Guam, my graduate student, current Andrea Stafford, has gotten her degree, and now Henry Fandel is there still. These birds went extinct on Guam, Mariana crows, and they're only found on this tiny little island in the Northern Marianas, Rota, and there's about 600 left in the entire world. One of my other graduate students, Aubrey, who just got her PhD a year ago, has been studying one population and of the morphology of the jungle crow, Corvus macrorhynchus. In orange, that is the total estimated range of one species. And you're telling me that down there with all those crows on islands in the Philippines, in Indonesia, Jakarta, up into actually into Eastern Europe, they're all one species? We haven't looked at those crows. We've only looked at them in a few places. So those are undiscovered, probably island species in there. Whoops. No. And this is the last really cool recent thing that we've found. This is from one camera trap. The Javan rhinos are endangered, and they were doing camera traps on them and discovered that slender-billed crows were coming in to pick off the ticks, and the rhinos were acting to facilitate it, moving their ears, standing still. Here's a picture of ticks on rhinos down on the right. No one had any idea that these guys were cleaners. And we still don't know enough about it. This is one tiny camera trap study. And of course, then there's the fish crows, about whom, as they move north and up into Canada, we've got only Dr. Loomis has the only one who's done extensive studies on them. So 46 or more different species of Corvus doing what? Are they in trouble? Where are the species? Are there maybe many more species? We have no idea. So with that, I will just leave you to the thought that we should all go out and study some crows on foreign lands. And my last big push is that if you really take one species or one group in today's world, you can just see a whole lot by looking through that eyes of that one species. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was wonderful. A lot of stuff to chew on, and questions are beginning to come in. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Matt Hayes from the Illinois Audubon Society headquarters asked, you discussed the benefits that parents receive from their mature offspring staying to help their siblings. What is one benefit and one detriment for the mature offspring staying with their parents instead of finding their own territory? Great question.
Yeah, that's sort of the crux of people trying to explain cooperative breeding, because obviously when you're raising your siblings, you're not raising your own kids, of course, unless you manage to mate with your stepmother, in which case I have to say in a couple cases, they were incredible helpers. It was as if they knew. So we can't discount that little contribution. But we think that things, they may stay and cooperate for a number of reasons. Sometimes it may be that access to mates or to territories. So if you think about urban areas as being very densely packed with territories, there just may not be much space to establish your own territory. And it may be better to help your family, to whom you are related, than try to just, go off into the hinterland and wait around hoping that something's going to open up. The other thing is you may get practice. Our 2-year-old females, none of them raised babies. I had a 2-year-old male who raised one, but I think the female might have been older. So it may take more practice than we realize. And these are just really hard questions to answer of, because you need to know a lot of individual crows for a long time to be able to compare these things.
That's great. It's kind of like they hang out and babysit a little bit so they learn to take care of their own is
And
one way to phrase that.
they
Yeah.
may facilitate those kids for a long time, and then those kids may turn around and become their helpers.
Yeah. Another question from Jeffrey. How do you think urban crows will be affected by more spraying to counteract growing mosquito populations and or other changes from climate change? That's really two different questions.
Right. The mosquito things, I think, obviously the quick answer is it all depends on what they use.
Mm,
Is it going to be something that goes down into the soils, is found in beetle larvae, or in caterpillars? Those kinds of things could easily transfer to the crows, and it could be a big problem. Um, I, since I don't know what the latest on mosquito spraying kinds of things are, um, I'm not sure what to say. The climate change is really fascinating, and have a study that we're just writing up that actually shows that well, two things. One is birds' beaks turn out to be thermal dumps, away, so the bigger beaks, the deep part of the beak around the base of the beak, at the skull, is one place where they actually lose heat. And expanses of legs in some birds are longer where it's warmer. I don't think that's going on in crows, but our nestling crows, it turns out, if they are in a nest, and they're not flying birds, so I can't say anything about the adults, but in a nest, in a season, a nesting season that has been hotter, so they've been exposed to hotter temperatures, their beaks are actually significantly larger than you would expect.
wow.
And does that last? We're working on that.
Yeah. And then Greg asked about incestuous matings, urban or rural? Is it more in one or not at all in the other?
I think we just don't have enough rural information to know. Um, I will say there's some behavior that we've seen, and a lot of times it involves crows that aren't banded, where we actually will, in a nesting season, you'll see like groups of 10 birds flying around nest to nest and almost attacking those nests, or perhaps the pair. And one of the ways that we've never seen a female accede to an outside mating other than her mate. So they scream, they throw themselves around, and I think the fascinating thing is that females don't seem to gain very much out by being mated by someone other than their pair. And these incestuous matings are just sort of the worst of it. But it turns out that females, if you look at the birds that outside their pair mate that they've mated with inadvertently, shall we say, they are no less related to them than their mate was. So they've not improved, they've not gotten outbreeding, which is what some people think. I don't know what to say about rural birds, but the nests are way more separated.
Hmm. That would make sense. Denser populations in urban areas where there's less habitat.
Yeah.
Deanne Watt is asking, why do you think there aren't any crows in South America?
Yeah. I'm not even gonna, I have no better ideas than anybody else, which, the accidents of history and the way animals have moved. Fish crows, just to throw out something, it's like human populations moving into South and North America. We are very, very poor, have a very poor understanding of where these birds came from. American crow's sibling species is the carrion crow. So apparently they are good flyers and they moved from the east to the west. Fish crows, their closest relative, not American crows at all, is the Tamaulipas and Sinaloan crows in Mexico. So they're coming from a completely different direction. And the crows then have made it down into the Caribbean, but not into South America.
Hmm.
So I'm going to say clumps. I know, no.
Another study project.
Yeah,
Another
sure.
graduate student's question. Um, Jeffrey also asked, or he notes that crows were wiped out in Chicago during West Nile, and they have not seemed to recover their populations at the same level during this period of time when it seems they might have. Do you have any idea about possible reasons of why they repopulate some urban areas and haven't since West Nile?
Yeah, I mean, basically that's what we've got also. By the way, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I can't see very much and it would make me feel a little better to do that. Hold on, let me just get stop
Yeah,
share.
so at this point, if you want to open your video so she can at least see our responses.
Yeah, I'm trying to get, I'm trying to find my, there we go.
So there's the
Yeah.
many faces. A few of us are visible. So you're having the same issue
Open the
there in
chat.
Ithaca?
Yeah, so basically we have the same thing in Ithaca. We have not recovered the population. The territories are larger, the families are smaller. It seems like birds are less likely to stay in the Ithaca area per se, and maybe leapfrog over to Cortland or other places. I think this is, I mean, it's basically the other part of the story is West Nile hasn't gone anywhere. So I picked up 3 crows this year that were West Nile positive. And then we've got HPAI. So we've got the highly pathogenic avian flu. And that's hell on wheels on crows. They just die really fast. So I think that it may be that we're not entirely aware of the continued presence of West Nile. People keep asking me, oh, aren't crows getting resistant? And usually they say, I know because I talk to people in California and so many more out in California are surviving. Yeah, but the virus has mutated. And by the time it got out to California, if you take that virus, it doesn't kill our Northeast crows quite as well as the original virus.
Wow.
So there's 2 things when you start to talk about a disease. There's the animals that want to resist it, and there's the disease itself. So where we are, we're still getting crows that die. The ones that have survived because we've gotten about 5 or 6 birds into the Cornell's wildlife veterinary facility. And with, it's a disease where you die of fever and all that sort of thing, even if you don't get meningitis. And so those that have been put on all sorts of supportive fluids and force feeding and whatnot, we've got a few that came through. And I've got one bird who's back out there after surviving, and he's got a raft of kids.
That's
So.
great. Totally different kind of question. I think responding to the crow on the Javan rhino, Julie Rand writes, we saw crows in South Africa picking insects off of domestic cattle. Usually we associate that behavior with cattle egrets. Could it be possible crows learn the food source from cattle egrets?
I would not put it past them. I mean, obviously they're very sensitive to who's got food, and it doesn't have to stick with your species. And the other interesting thing, another story is that, oh, I'm going to blank on the bovid that was introduced into Australia. And in one place where it's a Southeast Asian, starts with S, sorry, blanking. on the cow-like thing that's been established there. And there's one family of, I think it's, I'm trying to remember which of the Australian crows, but they've started taking ticks off of these animals. And these are bovids who apparently evolved with things like minas that are cleaners, and they're facilitating. They lie down, they put their legs up, and the crows are like, whoa, this is great.
Yeah, it makes it
And
easy.
so,
Easy
and that seems to
pickings.
be local.
Yeah. The more I learn about crows, the more I think about, how intelligent they are, and bird brain should be a compliment. And for all of you, if you haven't read Mark Twain's long poem, Indian Crow, it's one of Mark Twain's best pieces and lesser known, which leads to Kelly Winter's question. And then Kelly commented towards the question as well. American crow's brain size is 9 to 12 grams. And so could crows become, I think, meaning sentient or creatures?
Well, I think that if you actually look at their brain for body size, they're right up there with some of the primates. It's just that we forget how light a bird is, and he's like, oh well, a tiny little brain like this, yeah, but next to a I don't know, trying to think of some medium-sized capuchin monkey was really clever monkeys. They're heavy. And so when you start to think about brain for body size, our American crows are equal or better than ravens with brain to body size. And when, in a very famous study that I think was flawed to begin with, where they had a whole bunch of different species and they gave them tubes, and the animal was supposed to learn that you couldn't get through the side of the tube, and it was supposed to suppress its response to a clear tube. And they didn't include any corvus in there, and somebody was irritated by that, and he ran a whole bunch of corvus, and they did as well as any chimp.
Wow.
So, I think that, oh, and the other cool thing is if people look around, there's probably some easily accessible ones. The papers are kind of tough. Bird brains are structured differently than mammalian brains, but it's turning out that functionally they're doing a lot of the same things. So it was thought for a long time, oh, they don't have this pyramidal cell, the way things are arranged. Well, it turns out that they've got more neurons per cubic whatever, and they're much more densely packed. And so they're selected to be light.
Yeah. So Kelly Winters added another comment that I will go ahead and jump in and say that um, back to the original question, could they be sentient? They definitely are sentient. And the more we learn about them, the more they are clearly conscious of their world. They're problem solvers, they're tool users. So often we think, and this is my personal opinion, we think humans are above and beyond, but the truth is we're animals like all of them, and crows have learned a lot of things. I love the study where they taught crow basic math, colors, and shapes, and the crow was able to put that together and tell how many red squares or yellow triangles. And the scientist who did all this work didn't learn anything about crow language. So who's learning from who? Um,
Yeah.
back to
And
the other.
that's a huge, big hole. I mean, what
Yeah,
American crows are doing, I think I'm beginning to get a little bit of it, but I can't, it's not
yeah,
publishable.
yeah. What learning their language and their communication. Back to the other questions. There's just a couple more. Um, Deanne White, Deanne Watt says, we have a lot of crows in Springfield. Is there anything we can do to benefit the crows?
I think especially if they stay around in the winter, offering them, and it's fun for you, offering them decent food, and that might be really high quality dog foods. They'll figure out how to get it wet. They're good at that. And if you put out a bird bath, they will make your bird bath disgusting by wetting things in that bird bath. Um, and peanuts are always good. So those kinds of things that just offer them accessory food, but good food, not pizzas.
not pizza. Jeffrey just wrote in pizza. You may have seen that. Thank you, Jeffrey. And then one last question from Kathleen Waterlawn. Would the crow that survived West Nile virus, could it have passed on any antibodies to its offspring, therefore protecting them from getting the disease or surviving it?
Yeah, so we actually looked at for antibodies in young crows in the years where we were having a lot of West Nile. We never found any antibodies. So that's where it would have to be a female putting it in her eggs, an actual antibody that would increase its resistance. But that crow that did survive, that we have back out there, his sibling also took forever. He came down with West Nile virus. We knew he had it, but he would, every time we tried to catch him to get him in, we couldn't. And so he survived a long time, suggesting that they shared some genetic resistance that wasn't complete. I mean, if you're outside in the great world with hawks and you have a fever, you are not in good shape, just because of the hawks, if nothing else. And he ultimately, we got him into the lab, and he died, but he had aspergillosis, and they did a first test, and they said he doesn't, he never had West Nile. And I said, I want you to look and make sure that he didn't have West Nile. And they did a PCR full workup. Sure enough, he'd been exposed to West Nile. So his sibling, it may be that they are mildly resistant in that lineage. And I'm just really hopeful, because he's been so successful with kids, that he has lots. But it would be female crows that would pass on those antibodies, and we haven't had any evidence of that.
Well, I want to end by thanking you all for coming. Thank you for all the great questions. Thank you for being good listeners and keeping yourself muted. But most important, thank you, Ann Clark, for a wonderful, engaging, and inspiring presentation.